Welcome back to the Social Work Race podcast. Thank you for joining me. This is the platform for you if you are newly qualified, especially if you're newly qualified or a social work student. This is for you. And if you're doing any of those other apprenticeships as well, excellent. I think that's the best way to go, to be honest. So, anyway, this is a heavy session. Why? Because um, we're going to look at a very heavy topic of the death of a young child, Sara Sharif. It is current news. We're going to see what we can learn from this. And I'm dealing with this from a social work perspective. Yes, I'm a social worker, and there's just so much here. So you have to excuse the pauses. Do you know what I mean? I've got a daughter, I've got two daughters, and it's no joke when you think about what can happen to our children in our communities. It gets real when you get close to these families, and when you're a social worker, just get ready for the ride. What I won't I, I'm always trying to encourage social workers to social work, or the newly qualified, to join the force. I'm encouraging people to join the force. Sometimes I have to be honest about what it is when you get here, right? So this type of incident with this young child is where social workers meet the stage. I mean, literally, the stage, like if you were at a concert, the stage of judgment from the world. And I can tell you this, in all honesty, whilst I always want to encourage social workers to join the force, um, at some point in your career, no matter how good you do for someone, um, somebody's coming for you. That's the reality. So we're going to review the case, and I found it quite easy to. I did a little bit of side research, but it was along with the information I've gathered from different sources. I'm going to use an excerpt, the article on the Sky News page. Um, yeah, I'm going to use the article from the Sky News page. It's not like me to just read, but I found it quite easy to do because what they've done is they've captured a lot of key voices. So I want to use that to understand, and I'm going to critique what the world sees or what they might be seeing. And then I'm also going to look at how we can try our best to avoid this in this country as social workers. So what I'll do is I'll share here we go. So I'm going to share the articles right here and let's read through it because it is a bit frustrating to read. So we're going to actually look at Rachel D'Souza. She's a children's commissioner for England. And I always, I haven't got any critique against anyone. I'm not going to do that, right? I'm just picking up. I'm critiquing narratives. I'm not critiquing individuals, right? And I think, Dame D'Souza she's got thick skin. She can take it. So we know in this case, Sara Sharif, where she was abused over time by her dad, mom, looks like uncle. And there was an element, I think her auntie or aunties are also involved in that abuse as well. In the sense that they knew it was happening. That's the tricky part, right? So so what we want to do is just unpick what we know. And let's bear in mind, I haven't seen the assessment. Let me just click out of this. I haven't seen the assessment of the family. I don't have access to it. And even in the local authority, it was in Surrey. Even in the local authority, most social work, it's probably the case is probably locked down now anyway. When the child died, they locked the cases so that nobody can enter into the account apart from certain level of management. Um, Nobody knows really what the full case is apart from maybe the manager of the team and the social worker. Really the only people that know, and those that are doing the investigation, right? They're the only people that know what's really gone on in this case. So when people are questioning me because I'm getting a lot of DMs about this, what do I know apart from what I read on the internet? So there is a review that is going to be taking place that will help us make sense of it. And in those reviews, they break it all down because this is a high level case. And I wonder, if you've got to ask the question, this being a high level case, is it because they're of their heritage, their minorities? Because this happens all the time. Many children a year are killed in various ways, but you don't often see it in the news. And I just wonder why some families make it into the news and some don't. But that's a critique. I want you to bear that in mind. But let's read through um, this article. Okay. I'm going to fly through some of it. So the commissioner, she told Sky News that we need justice and we need action from the government and from children's social care with a set of real actions. Clearly, she was totally let down. That's Sarah. She was let down. Yes, she was let down. Who was she let down by? Well, we don't know yet. Um, but if we're going to say it's a social worker, then we also have to say, then it could well be the system that the social worker is working within. Do you know what I mean? You can't just blame the social worker. That's a very narrow way of looking at it. And I'm speaking to the public on this as well. It's a narrow way of looking at it. Why was there failure? We don't know. We know that a lot of critique is going to come to certain individuals. I feel sorry for the social worker involved. We don't know any of the circumstances. But let's read through. She called for the government to introduce a unique identifier for children and share data on them between the various children's services. I think I'd agree with that. We need a database where everybody can access it. I don't, I think for security reasons, I get it. But when I want to find out, just like the police, and I think the NHS, they all struggle with accessing information. They have to request it. And sometimes that information can take days. If I request information today from a neighboring local authority, I can't get it over the phone. I have to request it. It's got to go through certain levels of management before that information is then released. So there are walls to multi-agency approaching and safeguarding, of families. That's what it is. She added, this little girl was identified by the school as being at risk of abuse and then allowed to be home educated. I've been in that exact situation. So we have parents I've worked with a family who were neglecting the child. I won't say the type of neglect, but then they've opted to homeschool, and there is no law against that. And I've fought with schools who are trying to pressure me. I remember I had a dispute with a school who wanted me to impose that the parents allow their children to go to school because they didn't believe the parents could do a good enough job. When I visited the home, the parents had adequate levels of education. The children had learning needs anyway. So it was like they didn't need a copious amount of work to be done with the children. They could only do a certain amount because of the child's learning needs. I can't impose that. I'm a social worker. I can't impose that unless I think they're coming to any kind of harm. And people need to know is that we are safeguarding social workers. We are not there to impose education standards on children that are not in our care. And I don't think all professionals recognize that particular issue. Let's go in. Okay. Okay. Bear with me. Leading safeguarding expert Simon Bailey told Sky News about missed opportunities by authorities to intervene. Now, this is where I got to start to get critical. All right. Because when people talk about missed opportunities, you have to understand that even if a social worker was on the case, no, I'll get there. What thresholds? We'll look at that in a moment. So he said quite clearly the system failed her because she tragically died at a very, very young age, where all the indications are that it could have been averted, he said. Now, I just want to know, how do they know? How do they know this? Because if I we'll get to it, because I think we're going to see where the schools made a referral and what the referral was about. Okay, but I do not like when people speak ahead of when the review has taken place, because we how do we know that it could have been averted? And I'll say that for a very good reason. You'll see later on. Mr. Bailey, a former National Police Chiefs Council lead for child protection, blamed not enough professional curiosity among social workers. Why would you say that? Uh, you know, how does this person, I don't care where they worked, right? Unless you social work on the front line, how do you know that social workers, that's a plural. How does he know that there isn't enough professional curiosity? Okay. I'm just coming against the narrative that someone knows all of the social workers out there. I would have said we have to be careful, but we can't say that there isn't enough professional curiosity with social workers. How do they know that? That's a bit frustrating to hear. I'm going to keep it on this screen. I don't want to shrink it too much. Um, did they truly understand the significance of the harm that she was facing and that ultimately saw the appalling injuries that she sustained? He asked. Was information shared effectively? Now, I don't know if that's the same point he's making here, but let's just talk about the injuries, and we'll get a bit more about that further on, I think, from the school. Um, if we see a child with injuries, let's say, or no, if we have indication that a child has been hurt, we can't, unless we have a Section 47 inquiry and we have a child protection medical, social workers are not going to strip kids down. We can't do that. It's not in our remit to do that. What we can do is, if we think that there is abuse taking place and it's significant, then what we do is we will have a strategy meeting and a Section 47 inquiry, and then we can have a child protection medical, and the parent has to be present. We don't take there are hardly any of the rights of the parent are imposed on at that point, but most parents comply with that, right? Um, but he's asking a question: did they understand the significance of harm that she was facing? We don't know. We haven't seen the review. We haven't seen the assessment. Maybe he has. Um, and then, was information shared effectively? What does that mean? So, if information was shared effectively, what is he talking about, across different local authorities? Well, then that answer is no, and that's not the social worker's fault. And the systems do need to be pulled together. He says there had been previous allegations of abuse against both Sarah's parents. Yeah, so there's a history. Now, if they're within a local authority, then we can see their previous assessments and then say, well, no, there's a history here. So, upon receiving that new referral from the school, you would also get a look at the history. There will be a chronology included in that referral usually, and you can see, oh, there's a lot that's gone on here, and it might be a repeat, and it's usually a repeat of issues. If it's domestic abuse 5 years ago, then it's probably domestic abuse now, or some level of abuse. Those are the kind of typical patterns you will see. So it says, at birth in 2013, she was made the subject of a child protection plan, something that happens when children are deemed to be at risk. Yeah. Well, sort of. It's not really explained very well there. Um, yeah. Of harm, significant harm or neglect or abuse. Yeah, fair enough. Okay. The following year, her parents separated. Sarah was taken into foster care before being returned first to her father and then her mother, as each parent accused the other of abuse. Children don't go into care for that reason. Children go into care because they're neglected or abused, or there's emotional harm. Any one of those, really. And it's such that if this child has two parents and they're in acrimony and the child is removed, it was that bad. And so foster care is like, well, where were other members of the family? We would go to them first. So it just looks like it was really bad for her to have been in foster care 4 years later, in 2019, a battle in the family court led to Sarah's father, Irfan Sharif, being awarded custody. So clearly, mum couldn't show herself to be. Um, why is that like that? Why mother couldn't show herself to be an appropriate carer at that time, which is actually quite rare because usually dad works and mum is usually at home with the children. But if she couldn't show herself to be the one, then that might point to something. But whether we should say that is that a form of discrimination, I think it probably is. So then in 2023, this year, March 2023, this year, Sara's school made a referral to Surrey Social Services. Teachers had become concerned about bruises on her face. Sarah, had given different explanations for them to two members of staff. So children, especially of her age, I think she was 9, they don't lie very well. They're not good at it at all. And you can push through their lies and pick their lies apart, whether it's by force or whether it's by being gentle. Children don't uphold lies very well. And so, me personally, and I'm not just saying that because I'm on here, but me personally, I would have said, two different stories. I would have pushed through that. Do you know what I mean? Um, and then there's an article that I could probably read into. She never smiled once in months before her death. Well, the jury was told. Okay. Social workers contacted the father to tell him that they were investigating before running a multi-agency check on her background. The case was closed 6 days later. I don't understand that because maybe, sorry, maybe dad could have just said, "Oh no, she bumped her head on the radiator." I don't know what was the reason. We don't know yet. They'll release that information in time. But for it to be closed 6 days later from that, that was this is the thing. The social worker has to be convinced, and then the social worker's manager has to be convinced that this should be a closure. So there's at least two people involved in that closure, at least. All right. And then Mr. Bailey said that that decision will need to be scrutinized. Yeah. Yeah. Now, gosh, look, I'm trying to run ahead of the script and I'm going to hold it back. Okay. Yeah. So you need to look at the chronology or the history to understand what's going on. If this was a one-off, then it would be a different picture, genuinely. But if you've got a history of parents being unable to, and then child being on a child protection plan, you've got to think there's a lot going on here again. Yeah. Um, so then the parents withdrew Sarah from school in the April, and then months later she was dead. Now, that is a lot of pressure because what I have to do now is say, that is a lot of pressure on me because I'm thinking if I go into someone's house or I get a referral just like this, bruises on the face, bruises on the arm. I've been in these situations before. Um, and I don't at that point necessarily have threshold to remove the child. But if the parents are offering an answer that is plausible, that means that that child will probably stay in the home. And this is the thing I want everyone to think about regarding Sarah Sharif and any other case that where a child is referred into the system. When a child is referred into the system, and there is some level of like maybe an injury, just the slightest, or nothing. Say major, it's major, but it's not major in terms of blood and stuff like or broken bones, but just a slight bruising. Do we call the police? Because social workers can't remove children, but do we call the police and say this child needs to be removed out of the care of the parents? Now, I'm going to give you an example of why, a reason as to why I say that, and an example. Recently, just about a couple of months ago, we had a riot in Leeds where we were worried about neglect or abuse. The courts and the police heard the case and they went and took the children. And a whole set of streets were destroyed because people felt that. And what was the word on the street in the neighborhood? they're just taking our children for no good reason. That's what I'm talking about. So when we're talking about, and I want to go back to the article earlier on when, real changes is what is being called for in social services, right? The only changes that we can make is that the government adjusts the law so that if there's ever an incident like this, it's an instant removal. That is it. We have to adjust it, which means that we are eroding away at parents' responsibilities and parental rights. That's what we have to do in order to safeguard our children. And you will find that a lot of children will end up in the system, and the system cannot cope as it is right now. We don't have many children in the system in the terms of, for every 500 cases that we get, there's not many children that actually end up in the system, although there's too many. But if I were to have a child right now, and I was in that situation not long ago where we just couldn't find carers for some children till the late hours, we couldn't do it. There was no one around, and we were looking the day before. And carers will read the profile of the children, and the carers will say, "Look, yeah," because sometimes carers are in it for the money. That's true. Sometimes carers are in it because they care about children, but they might find that they've only got so much capacity, and then they read the profiles of the children, of the level of neglect and then their behavior, and they're like, "We don't want to do it." And so I had a situation the other day where three carers pulled out in the same day. The system would crumble. So, what could the government do? I'm not proposing anything. I'm asking a question. What, in reality, could the government do if we were going to pull every child out who we suspect is being abused? What do we do? Now, I know this in some local authorities, depending on the amount of pressure that they have, they will try their best to work with a family where they are. And a case like Sarah, depending on what part of the country they're in, they might be encouraged to work with that family. And it does it varies so much as to how much we work with a family when we see some level of abuse, and it varies massively. Bruises on the face, for me, that would have been a child protection situation, just from the sound of it. Um, but I don't know what the parents said. uh, You know, realistically, when people are screaming for change in the system, it will mean, if you want social workers to go in and safeguard these children from all this abuse, it will mean an erosion of your rights. That's the only way. The courts, you'd be surprised. People have a real hate of the system. I sit in courts. I've sat in courts many times, and you listen to them. The judges are apprehensive to erode your rights. They have a directive, and their directive is to keep the family together. So if we're even removing the children from your care, it is at that stage temporary. And we want, if possible, as a priority, to keep the child in the family. Uh, Aunts, uncles, cousins, older siblings, we will try and do that. The courts do not want to erode people's rights any further when it comes to their parental rights and responsibilities. Why am I saying that? Because if you want us to protect the children, you want us to go in and just get it right. And it's actually impossible to just get it right all the time. That's the reality of social working on the streets. In the real world, social workers will miss things, sadly, because you cannot see every deception. We use this, we call it disguise compliance, when someone who we're exploring or investigating is really good at pulling the wool over people's eyes in general. That's not just social workers, that's education, that's police, that's everybody, even the neighbors who see them every day. We know that. And it's the same case with Arthur Labinho and Baby P, Victoria Kilimbie, all of these children over the years that have died. because parents have learned how to pull the wool over people's eyes. You might think that it wouldn't happen to you. It can happen to everyone. I'm saying this to say that disguised compliance is real. And these parents, when they caught on to the fact that people would be watching them because of the abuse on the child, on the visual injuries on Sarah, they pulled the child from school. There's nothing we can do about that because that's their right. We have to, if you want changes in the system, as the commissioner is calling for, we have to take away some of your rights so that we can impose our will on your family in the hope of safeguarding your child. That's the reality. It's long winded, but it is an area of contention. Some people are for that. But again, we just had riots the other day. A town was burnt down because we did that. We imposed, the system imposed its will on a family, and the town felt attacked. That's what happens when we try to save children. I've been in that situation before. It's not easy because I'm trying to save children from abuse. And not everyone gets that. I'm not hurting my child, or your child is hurt. Half of the country wants me to take that child away, and half of the country hates me for even for talking about it. That's social working. But what I wanted to do, I mean, this is going on quite long. What I wanted to do was talk about what we can learn. Um, actually, I wanted to touch on something as well. So, in terms of threshold, sometimes you see things, we don't have the threshold to do anything more than what we've done, which is just to work with the family as best we can. We will not catch them all. It's a sad reality, but it is what it is. We can't catch every lying parent out there. We can't catch every murderous parent. We can learn from our mistakes and do better. Yes, let's have a look. My my advice to you is this: as a social worker, as a social work student, I don't care what your label is. Full accountability must go on to parents. When we see behaviors or neglect of concern, behaviors of concern and neglect and abuse, and I'm talking about low level, okay? Low level, meaning no threshold to remove. We're worried about that behavior. We have to work with you, and we have to. That's our job. We have to work with you in that. When we see that, we we must, as social workers, put full accountability on a parent. I'm saying to the parent, we don't smack here. We don't smack our children in this country. It's allowed legally, but it's limited. But do not smack your children. Why did you smack? Why did you hit? Why did you shout? I want to hear this parent's answer. Yeah, I need to hear what you have to say. I want to hear from the parent whether they're accepting responsibility for something that we know they did or not. This is crucial. Do not just have an answer. I've read assessments and I've worked with parents who are not addressing the issue because they're avoiding taking accountability because they don't think they've done anything wrong. If I don't see accountability, I don't trust an individual. If we see bruises and it came from your hand and you justify it, you're dangerous. So accountability is key to be seen. We need accountability. If we don't have accountability, we have danger. You know from their answers. Don't complete an assessment and ask questions. I've read assessments where you read you've got questions that are unanswered. I asked dad or mum this question, you know, and you're reading and you're like, well, where's the answer? What did they say? I'd have to go back to the social worker. What did they say? Have they accepted they've done wrong? Sometimes parents don't. If I don't see that, anyway, point number two, we must ask, ring doorbell. We must ask uncomfortable questions. Yes, we will be hated for it. That's how it works sometimes. Most parents are not like that. but there are some that do not like, and it is linked to the whole area of accountability. We must ask uncomfortable questions from parents. And it means that sometimes it sounds like we're accusing them of something which they probably feel they haven't done. We must ask those questions. Don't be afraid of asking those questions. It's essential. Stop, excuse the stuttering. It's essential. You will be hated for it. That's life. Point number three. You have to analyze what people are saying. They say be curious. Let me tell you what I do. I let people talk. When I ask questions, sometimes in trying to cover their tracks, they will talk a lot and I let them talk. And usually, and I say usually, someone will say something that kind of incriminates them, tells you who they're about their true nature. You listen to people, they will talk, and it's from that that you can determine a lot about what they think and feel. And you can put that in the assessment and make your decisions wisely based on what the parents have said. Yeah, I'm talking about parents. Okay. Because when people are talking, they're giving us clues. Listen to what they're saying, not just an answer, but the meaning behind it. Point number four, try and speak to the children alone as far as possible. Now, children of that age, 9 years old, they can't hold up lies for long. You can push through them lies. You can tell when a child is lying. Um, Over time, there's ways to do it. Um, you can do a piece of work with them, or you can get someone else to do it with you present. Sometimes I get their favorite teacher to do the work, and I sit in the background and listen for them to ask key questions about these children. I recommend that you do that. I want to bullet. Oh, here we go. Bullet point these are lovely. So do that work with a child to explore their experience. They can't lie for long. Point number six. What do you think disguise compliance is? I want you to think to yourself, could I be hoodwinked? The answer is yes. And ask yourself the question, in what way? Analyze yourself, because if you work in children's services, you will be hoodwinked at some point. I'm not pointing to the behaviors of the parent. I'm looking at you, analyzing you. And the way that you get around disguise compliance is by asking questions. So you may not be necessarily be able to see through their behavior, because disguise compliance, you can actually see it sometimes. Sometimes you can't. Um, you can't tell. Well, actually, there's two types. There's two areas of this. There's the disguise compliance, and then there's being hoodwinked, which means that they've covered their tracks and you can't tell. That's different. Disguise compliance is when they're saying things to try and throw you off track, but you can tell. And it's over time you can tell sometimes. Listen to yourself and ask yourself the question: how might someone do that to me? I recommend that. I want to go back to point number one. When it comes to accountability, um, I remember a parent getting really upset with me because I asked them to look at how their behavior is contributing to the problem. And they didn't like it. They don't like me, and that is it. But every parent has to ask that question as a parent anyway. Love is not enough. We have to be accountable and reflective as parents. I'm a parent. I have to be constantly evolving. I do not exist in a space of this is what I am and this is what's best. I'm willing to learn. Every parent needs to have that mindset. Yep. Okay. The reality is that we can't win them all. And Sarah's death means a few things. It means for me, am I next? It means, will I be hoodwinked next? It means, can I save the next child? Can I ask the right questions for the next child I have on my caseload? Um, Sarah's death means this to me. It means it must not happen on my watch. I'm going to say something else about this whole social work thing. Sometimes we can see a problem, but there's nothing we can do about it. That's one side of social work that I haven't really heard anyone talk about. I will have a gut feeling that something's not right, but legally, there's nothing you can do with a gut feeling. You will see a problem and you're thinking, this family's coming back, or will this child live until they come back? And that is a pill that I will not swallow easily. So yeah, there are some families that I'm worried about the children, and I'm thinking, will they survive? But they just haven't crossed that threshold of our intervention. The police won't get involved any further. And so I think the reality in society is that we are expecting deaths because we are guided by the law, and the law sets the line as to how we intervene. And so some people fall in the cracks, in the gaps of our system. There's gaps all over our system. And it's one of the best systems out there. There are gaps all over the place. And some parents call us screaming, we need help. And I'm like, I'm sorry, you fall into that crack where there is no help. And there's nothing I can do about it. And so, in the same way that you see the needs not being met by a child, but you can't do anything about it because they don't meet the threshold for removal, they don't meet the threshold even for child protection, you're just waiting. And that's the ugly side of social work. But I do want to encourage you, because if you're in social work for any kind of reason, the fact is you will save many. That is a fact. You may not always feel like it, but if you reflect on the work that you've done, you've changed the trajectory of so many families. And if that's what you want to do, you won't always get to do the work that you want to do. You won't always have that sense of satisfaction. You won't always save the day, but I promise you, you will save so many families. And I think when you reflect, I had a reflection with a really great student today, and she said the work that I want to do, I can't do, and that's a frustration. But the reality is, in my opinion, she has saved many families by just being involved. And I think that that's something we need to talk about. Now, this is a really long podcast. I hope this helps. This is a late at night. I'm really tired. It's bedtime. Um, I hope this helps. This monologue. Just make sure you're not the next one, as far as possible, to be failing a child. Take care.